This is the Reading Instruction Show. I'm your host, Dr. Andy Johnson. Today we are looking at the Minnesota Read to Ensure Academic Development Act, or the READ Act. And I'm going to take maybe 2 or 3 videos to kind of pull this apart. Today we're going to pull apart just the first part, looking at the definition. But before I start, it's one thing to use words and terms, and it's another thing to use them accurately and know what they mean. And you'll see evidence, and this is an evidence-based presentation, that the READ Act was not designed by people with expertise in literacy, and that is a problem. So, Minnesota reading to ensure academic development, blah, 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 blah. The goal of this legislation is to have every Minnesota child reading at or above grade level every year, beginning in kindergarten. Okay, now a couple problems with that. Reading at or above grade level every year. What does it mean to read at grade level? To read at grade level. Is it grade level average? Is it a normative reference where you have a normal population and there's the bell-shaped curve? Is it the average score of all third grade students? Do they have to be reading in the first standard deviation or above the 50th percentile? What do you mean by reading at grade level? It couldn't be a normative test, a norm reference test. I am guessing it is the MCA's Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment exams, and these are a criterion reference test, and they are tests based on an arbitrarily set of criteria. The content is arbitrarily decided. And in the MCA's, what they did is they took a 3-dimensional benchmark standard. And a benchmark standard is something specifically that students should demonstrate they can do or know. It was 3-dimensional. And they created a 2-dimensional test out of it, which is kind of wacky, but I'll show you what that means. So someone arbitrarily decided 3rd graders should know this, 4th graders should know that, and 4th graders should know that. And they arbitrarily decided, I think this is basic, this is below basic, this is proficient, etc. Some group define that category. And we want students to read at grade level. Well, here's the stuff for reading level 3. And as you look at this, ask yourself, have you ever had to do these things in your real life? And these standards, these are core content state standards, tend to be based on a white male Eurocentric perspective of literacy. When in your adult life have you had to distinguish your own point of view from that of a narrator or those of characters? Now, this is an interesting thing to include in a literacy curriculum, but students are going to be defined as at or above or below grade level based on this criterion reference test. Okay, that is the premise, but let us look at the definitions of the READ Act, and this is a good place to start, and this is what we'll be doing today, just looking at the definitions. Evidence-based, according to the READ Act, means that instruction or item described is based on reliable, trustworthy, and valid evidence, okay, and has demonstrated a record of success in increasing students' reading competency in the areas of, and this is important, phonological and phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary development, reading fluency, and reading comprehension. And this is based on the 5 essentials as described by the National Reading Panel: phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. Now, the National Reading Panel was limited in its findings, and it was done in 2000, and it came up with nothing new. Their findings on phonics is very interesting, but here's the thing. The National Reading Panel was 14 people who got together for 18 months to review some studies. In comparison, the International Literacy Association has been together almost 70 years and is comprised of thousands of people Why would you think 14 people in 18 months could come up with something the International Literacy Association could not? It's just a little confusing, isn't it? But they came up with 5 elements, these 5 elements: phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, comprehension. These 5 elements are necessary but far from sufficient. If I focus only on those 5 elements, and that's what the Science of Reading and the READ Act wants you to do, you are not going to be providing a complete literacy curriculum. Here are 10 plus 1 things that should be included in a comprehensive approach to literacy instruction. It's like defining a car engine by defining only 5 things: spark plugs, pistons, timing belt, radiator, and crankshaft. Absolutely, these are 5 essential things, but they work together with the engine. This is a great analogy, by the way. And it is much more than that. So these 11 elements here, 10 plus 1, they work together like a car engine works together. And the whole thing, the term evidence-based is used here. It's based on a kind of naive understanding of science and of reading research. Evidence, when you say evidence, for who and for what purpose? Evidence shows that explicit phonics instruction is good for improving phonics scores, but this doesn't mean that all students in all grades need phonics instruction all the time. Because one strategy has evidence that shows it's effective, it doesn't mean that another strategy might not show more evidence, or evidence that it is more effective. And think about this. Evidence, you can find evidence for using behavior modification technique. You can find evidence that punishing kids works, but that's evidence pulled out of context. And it's for a specific thing, and I don't recommend that, by the way. There's evidence to support explicit systematic instruction for some things, absolutely, and everyone believes in explicit instruction. But there's also evidence to support a whole lot of other stuff outside of explicit instruction for reading subskills, for phonics. The trouble with the READ Act and the Science of Reading is they have self-selected evidence based on a preconceived idea. It's like focusing just on the crankshaft instead of the complete engine. Phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is hearing sounds and manipulating sounds, and everyone agrees it should be one part of an early literacy program, kindergarten, maybe preschool and early first grade. It's the ability to hear and manipulate sounds within a word. But the evidence is more correlational than causal. Can we say that phonemic awareness activities causes effective reading instruction, or causes reading achievement, or leads to reading achievement? More so maybe than just reading lots of good books. All right, explicit. What does explicit and systematic instruction for spelling, fluency, vocabulary, and oral language look like? That's what it says, that first part. Explicit and systematic instruction for spelling. What does that look like when you are teaching? Boys and girls, this is how you spell a word. And fluency, the ability to process letters quickly. What does direct, explicit, systematic instruction look like? Oral language. What are you instructing? What's the input in that lesson plan? The same with vocabulary. Are you going to just give definitions? Is that what explicit and systematic instruction looks like? And again, it's this act, the READ Act, it's a word salad. You found some important reading words and you just threw them all together and you decided that it would be something when it's not. All right, evidence-based literacy instruction is explicit, systematic, and includes those elements that can be differentiated to meet the needs of individual students. And differentiated to meet the needs. And it sounds like a great sentence, but differentiated means different, not more or less of something. Not more phonics or less phonics, but how are you going to make these things different? All right, the next one, the 3 cueing systems. And this is what it says. This is how it defines the 3 cueing systems. And the Reed Act says this should not be. 3 cueing systems, also known as meaning, structure, visual, means a method that teaches students to use meaning, structure, and syntax and visual cues when attempting to read an unknown word. And that is wrong, wrong, wrong. And this shows that whoever wrote the Reed Act knows nothing of literacy. I don't know how to put it any clearer. Let me explain. It screams ignorance. That the 3 cueing systems is not a method. It's not something you teach. It's not a skill. The 3 cueing systems, it's not a skill or a strategy. You do not teach the cueing systems. You do not. What it says is that we use multiple sources of information when we recognize words, and recognizing words is different from identifying words, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But we use semantic cues, which is information, prior knowledge, the context of the sentence. We use syntactic cues, grammar, knowledge of English, the order of words, and we use phonological or graphophonics cues, which is the letter clues. We use all 3 of these to recognize words while reading. And recognizing words means you see the word and you instantly know what it is. You automatically know it. You recognize it. You don't have to pause. And most of you are recognizing these words right here. To identify a word, you see the word, but you do not recognize it. You do not instantly know what it means. So you have to consciously employ a strategy. And we have 4 strategies that we employ when we need to identify a word. I don't know what this word is. I'm going to use morphemic analysis, or analogy, or phonics, or context. And Science of Reading wants to just teach one of these identifying word strategies. A balanced approach teaches all 4. 4 is better than 1. And you teach the strategy to develop the skill, meaning you teach these specifically using explicit and systematic instruction. This is what you do when you do memic analysis. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Very explicit with input, guided practice, modeling, and independent practice. We teach the strategy specifically so that students eventually do it automatically when they read. All right, fluency. This is what the Reed Act defines as fluency. The ability of students to read text accurately, automatically, and with proper expression. Now, I have some questions about this. I take a little umbrage. Reading fluency is the ability to quickly recognize words during the process of reading. You're able to process quickly. You don't have to stop. That's what reading fluency is. And that is different from reading text accurately. That's called word recognition, to read it accurately. And fluency should be separated from word recognition. They're 2 different things. You approach, if someone has a deficit in fluency, you approach it much different than if they had a deficit in word recognition or word identification. That's why we must separate them and not jumble them together. And it's different from reading with proper expression. What is proper expression? Is there improper expression? When in your adult life have you had to read anything, unless you are an actor, with proper expression? What I think they mean is prosody. And prosody is oral language that sounds like speech. That means as you're reading orally, one-on-one, the intonation, pauses, and inflections show that you're creating meaning. You pause at the right time. Questions go up. The inflection is appropriate to what you're reading. That's what fluency is, but fluency is the ability to process text quickly. And we do repeated reading and other strategies for that specifically. All right, what do they say about foundational reading skills? Include phonological and phonemic awareness, the big five again, phonics and decoding and fluency. Foundational reading skills appropriate to each grade level must be mastered in kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3. Okay. Struggling readers in grades 4 and above who do not demonstrate mastery must continue to receive explicit, systematic instruction to reach mastery. Okay, and this tells me again that whoever wrote this doesn't really understand literacy or reading instruction. The National Reading Panel report says that mastering a set of skills or sub-skills is not the answer. Now, the National Reading Panel report, that's where you get the essential 5. Some people hold that up as the holy book of reading instruction, and you shouldn't, because again, it was 14 people put together for 18 months to come up with this thing. Nothing new came from the National Reading Panel report, and there are a lot of methodological flaws. But, okay, if you're going to use the National Reading Panel report, you have to use all of it. This is what they said about phonics. The impact on comprehension is limited. It contributes only weakly, if at all, in helping poor readers apply these skills to read actual text. Insufficient data to draw any conclusions about the effects of phonics instruction with normally developing readers above first grade. And boom goes the dynamite. Fails to exert a statistically significant impact on poor readers in 2nd through 6th grade. But that's what the READ Act asks us to do. More of that stuff. It's not what the National Reading Panel report says, so what are you going to do? Oh, more stuff from the National Reading Panel report. Programs that focus too much on the teaching of letter-sound relations and not enough on putting them to use are unlikely to be very effective. Students need to apply their skills in daily reading and writing activities. Interesting. Programs that focus too much on phonics, like the stuff recommended in the READ Act, with little time spent practicing reading, are likely to be ineffective. And this is a quote from page 2-97. Systematic phonics instruction should be integrated with other reading instruction to create a balanced reading program. Ooh! And phonics should not become the dominant component in a reading program, neither in the amount of time devoted it, nor the significance attached. But what does the READ Act do? Just the opposite of what the National Reading Panel recommends. And yet, they do it. Now, if reading were simply decoding or sounding out words, what the READ Act asks for would make sense. But reading is not sounding out words, it's creating meaning with print. But this is based on the simple view of reading, which says reading is decoding times language comprehension equals reading with meaning. Meaning decoding, sounding out words, and then you listen to the words you've sounded out in your head. That's language comprehension. That's what reading is. And that's a simple view of reading based on the phonological processing model. That it is bottom up, the words appear on the page, you decode them, goes to the thalamus and up to the cortex. That's what reading is. Simple view of reading, as opposed to a neurocognitive model or a transactive view of reading, sometimes called an interactive view of reading. Creating meaning with print. During the process of reading, this is an empirical fact, almost 10 times more information is flowing from the cortex down than from the thalamus up. More information is flowing down to help you make sense of the words on the page. So, you're not just pulling data up from the page, you're using what's in your head to help you understand. And as you encounter this data, you've got multiple sources of data to help you recognize the words and create meaning with print. Neurocognitive of modeling. And The READ Act goes on to say struggling readers in grades 4 and above who do not demonstrate mastery of grade-level foundational reading skills must continue to receive explicit systematic instruction to reach mastery. And again, this is distinctly non-evidence-based, this strategy. Because again, the National Reading Panel, phonics instruction fails to exert a statistically significant impact on poor readers in 2nd through 6th grade. How do you make sense of that? All right. Mastering foundation reading skills are foundational. One can read and read well without mastering foundational skills. Now, this doesn't mean that foundational skills are not important, but reading is creating meaning with print, not sounding out words. And many readers can read just fine, can create meaning with print. Reading is not sounding out words, it's creating meaning with print. So, as the National Reading Panel says, systematic phonics should be integrated with other reading instruction to create a balanced reading program. Mastering foundational reading skills. Okay, what does the READ Act and the great state of Minnesota, how do they define a literacy specialist? This is interesting. A person licensed by the Professional Educator Licensing Standards Board, that would be PELSB, as a teacher of reading. A special education teacher, interesting. Or a grade 16 who has completed professional development approved by the Department of Education in structured literacy. We'll get to structured literacy, but this is so wrong from a number of points of view. First of all, anyone who is a special education teacher is a literacy specialist. Are you nuts? Look at the standards. Compare the standards for teacher licensure in elementary ed and special ed. Elementary ed has twice the reading standards that special ed does. Special education teachers, they tend to be experts in direct instruction. That does not make one a literacy expert. And direct instruction is just a very, very small component of good reading instruction. And I would not look to PELSB to tell me what a literacy expert is. Yeah, they're going to bully their way. I would go to someone like the International Literacy Association. And this is how they define a literacy specialist. They have these standards and they have components in each of these, curriculum instruction, and they have standards. This is what a literacy specialist is. Standards with all these components, standards with components. So you have to understand the complete literacy process. Learners and their environment, professional learning and leadership, practicum clinical experiences, all this stuff. And I put this up here. This is how real literacy organizations define a literacy specialist. Should I tell you how PELSB in the state of Minnesota, the great state, how do they define a literacy specialist? Someone who completes a program. You can understand literacy and teaching, or you can understand one of these cockamamie programs. Minnesota says you have to complete a professional development program approved by them for professional development. These are for-profit programs. They may be evidence-based, but they are not research-based. There's no research to support letters and what letters is teaching, orthographic mapping. And I've said this before, orthographic mapping may be a thing, but semantic mapping is much more of a thing. We store words in our head related to meaning, not letter patterns. And again, this tells me the great state of Minnesota doesn't know anything about teaching reading. Now, structured literacy, let's talk about that. It has to be structured literacy. The National Reading Panel doesn't support structured literacy. They said systematic phonics instruction should be integrated with other reading instruction to create a balanced literacy program. Structured literacy, we'll get to that in just a minute, but essentially it says you follow a specific structure. There's a specific scope and sequence, and that is the structure. You know, they use words that sound good, But when you unpack them, you realize they're just throwing a bunch of words up there that they think that's kind of sound good, but they don't really know what they mean when you start to unpack them. Now, they include MTS, multi-tiered system of support, systematic continuous improvement framework for ensuring positive social, emotional, behavioral development. And here's the thing with MTSS, and I don't know why they included it in the READ Act. At one time, we had RTI, which was working pretty gosh darn well. Students who had difficulties in reading, writing, and math, they had good classroom stuff, and then Tier 1, and then Tier 2. But when you started adding the MTSS, all this good stuff got diluted. And you started focusing on behaviors. They talk about social and emotional learning, but what they're meaning, social, emotional, and behavioral learning, MTS tends to focus an overemphasis on behaviorism, on behavior modification, and that is troubling. We had a great RTI thing. It was working. And then you decided that you have to control behavior. And here's the thing. If students' learning is aligned with their natural inclinations, if it's interesting, something they want to do, you don't have to manipulate and control behavior. But we make reading class frustrating and boring and so gosh darn uninteresting that we have to manipulate and control students to behave. Social, emotional, behavioral development too often means being subservient and following the rules. Oh, were you a good boy in church today? That means were you quiet and subservient? Are you a good boy, good girl? Meaning, do you follow the rules? Interesting. All right, oral language. This is how they define it. Spoken language includes speaking and listening, consisting of 5 components: phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. And interesting, those 5 components also apply to reading. And we learn these best, both speaking and reading, when these are in the context of authentic speaking and reading experiences. Oral language, yes. Phonemic awareness, as I said, ability to notice, think about, and manipulate individual sounds in spoken words. And it relates only to sounds. Cat, what do you get if you put k, a, t together? You're manipulating them, you're putting them together, you're pulling them apart. Now, the research that I've looked at phonemic awareness tends to be correlational, not causal. It's correlated to later achievement, but we can't say that phonemic awareness caused the later reading achievement. And I'll show you something. This is what the National Reading Panel said. Phonemic awareness training was found to be very effective in teaching phonemic awareness to students. Duh. Phonemic awareness instruction produced positive effects on both word reading and pseudo-word reading, meaning single words out of context and fake nonsense words out of context. And we never encounter words out of a context. They're always in a sentence, on a sign, or on a product of some sort. And it goes on to say, more is not necessarily better. National Reading Panel indicates that phonemic awareness training was effective regardless of its length. However, effect sizes were largest when training lasted less than 20 hours. And they're not calling it phonemic awareness instruction. They're calling it training. Training, not instruction, because you don't really teach phonemic awareness. You have activities. You train students to hear the sounds of words. Early phonemic awareness instruction, they used instruction there, cannot guarantee later literacy success. All right, phonics means explicit and systematic and direct instruction of the relationship between letters and sounds they represent, and the application of this knowledge in reading and spelling. We're going to focus on the spelling part, but everybody believes in explicit, systematic, and direct phonics instruction. I'm the holiest of whole language practitioners, and I believe in direct, explicit, and systematic phonics instruction. It's not the what, it's the how and the how much. And the National Reading Panel says you should have synthetic phonics, analytic phonics, embedded phonics, large unit phonics, and phonics for spelling. One is not more effective than the other, and if I were a teacher, I would use all 5 of those. National Reading Panel, again, phonics instruction contributed only weekly, helping poor readers apply these skills to read actual texts. And you've seen this before. But, it says this about phonics instruction, and National Reading Panel has a little different take on it. Now, the thing about spelling, that's confusing. Phonics is putting letter sounds together. Spelling is related to visual memory, the ability to store and retrieve letter patterns. So what direct systematic instruction do you have? This is how you spell teacher. That's the input. English language is not rule-based. There's very few spelling rules that apply consistently enough to be used. So how do you use direct instruction to teach spelling? And it's not clear how the relationship between letter and sounds helps with spelling after first grade. Just not very clear. And reading comprehension. Word recognition skills and language comprehension skills, that's that simple view of reading. Comprehension skills are taught explicitly by demonstrating, explaining, modeling, and implementing specific cognitive strategies to help beginning readers derive meaning through intentional problem-solving thinking processes. And that sounds wonderful. That sounds very, very professional, doesn't it? But what in the hell are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about here. Reading comprehension means you're creating meaning with print. It is a thinking process, not a decoding process. And this is the simple view again. Scarborough's stinking rope. Great theory, great model for a rope, but not so much for reading. Word recognition and language comprehension skills. Those two represent the simple view of reading. Recognize words and then listen to them in your head. That's the simple view of reading, and that's what this is asking. Word recognition skills and language comprehension skills. You recognize words and then you listen to them in your head, or you decode them and then you listen to them in your head. Decoding times language comprehension equals reading. And what exactly do you mean by comprehension skill? What is a comprehension skill? Do you mean study skill strategy? Is it something you do with narrative text, expository text? Is it a skill or is it a strategy? What specifically do you mean by that? Comprehension involves thinking. And we teach the cognitive processes like prediction, inference, cause, effect, support a statement, story grammar. We teach these cognitive processes specifically to develop the skill. But they are a means to an end. A predictogram, predictive, is a mean to an end, not an end in and of itself. And that end is the ability to create meaning with print, to comprehend, to understand. So we teach it explicitly, and then it becomes automatic as we do it over and over again. Structured literacy, an approach to reading instruction in which teachers carefully structure important literacy skills, concepts, and sequence of instruction to facilitate children's literacy learning and progress. Teachers don't carefully structure this. Don't let them fool you. They buy a for-profit reading program that has been structured for them. There's no teacher structuring at all. Structured literacy is characterized by the provision of systematic, explicit, sequential, and diagnostic instruction and phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and oral language development, and reading comprehension. Okay. Well, children are not standardized products. So you think you can have one structured sequence of skills just isn't realistic. Some students need more of this and less of that. Some students need more of that and less of this. They are not standardized products. And you look at your students, they are your scope and sequence to see what skills they're ready for. Just because someone has a list of skills that they think students should learn in a particular order does not mean that is so. And human beings learn complex skills best from whole to part to whole. You're engaged in the act of reading, you learn the sub-skills then in the context of that, and then you get to practice reading again. That's what whole to part to whole is. Students become our scope and sequence chart. Yeah, we have our list of skills we need to get to, but we see what our students need and what they're ready for. And we teach the children. We don't teach the program. We don't teach the scope and sequence chart. We are teaching children, and our children are different. So, systematic, explicit, sequential, and diagnostic instruction, if they would just take sequential out, I would be okay with it. But sequential means a predetermined order. And there's no research to show that students learn these best in any particular order. And systematic, explicit, sequential, and diagnostic, what does that look like for phonemic awareness? What are you going to teach them for fluency, explicitly? What are you going to teach them for vocabulary? Are you going to teach all definition, oral language development? What are you going to teach them? Reading comprehension. Well, I know what I would teach them. I would teach cognitive processes. And vocabulary development means the process of acquiring new words. And yes, we all agree a robust vocabulary improves all areas of reading, everything, and it's a strong predictor. Yes, 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 yes. But the question is, what is the process of acquiring new words? Because that's what it's asking for. Vocabulary development means the process of acquiring new words. Children learn 4,000 to 5,000 new words a year. What's the process of acquiring that? You can't learn all those words by looking them up and writing the definitions, or by having a teacher give you direct instruction. No. You learn vocabulary. You learn words through wide reading and exposure. That is how you learn new words best. You hear them and you see the words in context and you use them over and over again. That is how you develop word knowledge. Absolutely. All right, this was just the first part of the Minnesota Reading to Ensure Academic Development Act, the READ Act. And here I showed you why the writers of this bill obviously knew nothing about literacy, about reading instruction.